Imagine this. You stand at the threshold of yet another relationship, eyes wide, heart open, hope rekindled. The other person seems perfect, attentive, charming, familiar in a way that feels almost faded. But weeks or months later, you find yourself in a now all too familiar scene. Misunderstood, manipulated, exhausted, questioning your own worth. Again, the faces change, the names change, but the story remains eerily the same. It's as though you are a magnet for the very relationships that wound you most deeply. How is it possible? You vow never to repeat the same mistakes, you set boundaries, you try to heal, and yet, time after time, you find yourself entangled in dynamics that drain your spirit, suffocate your authenticity, and leave you doubting whether love can ever feel safe. Is it bad luck? Poor judgment? Some flaw within you? Or something far more unsettling? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher, would argue that none of these superficial explanations suffice. Instead, he would suggest that an unseen force, ancient and relentless, is pulling the strings behind your choices, something lurking beneath the surface of your consciousness, quietly orchestrating who you feel drawn to, who you allow in, and who you keep at arm's length. But here is the paradox. The very qualities in these toxic partners that devastate you are often the ones that feel most intoxicating. Why? How can what harms us also feel so magnetic? Imagine for a moment that your psyche is not a monolithic entity, but a fractured terrain, some parts of it known and embraced, others buried and disowned. Jung called these disowned fragments the shadow, traits, desires, fears, and wounds that you cannot consciously accept as your own. But what happens to these exiled aspects? Do they simply disappear? No, they live on, in the depths of the unconscious, waiting, scheming, seeking expression. Now imagine that this disowned part of you, silent and invisible, has the power to shape who you are irresistibly drawn to. Imagine that every time you meet someone who embodies these rejected traits, dominance, deceit, chaos, or emotional unavailability, you feel an inexplicable gravitational pull. It doesn't matter how wrong they are for you. Your conscious mind may scream in protest, but something deeper whispers, yes, this feels like home. But what if that sense of home is not a haven of safety, but a repetition of trauma? What if you are not choosing these toxic relationships freely, but rather being chosen by your own unexamined psyche? And here, the great question emerges, unsettling as it is inescapable. What if you are the architect of your own heartbreak, not by choice, but by unconscious design? Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Could it be that your most painful relational patterns are not random misfortunes, but expressions of unresolved internal conflicts? Are you unknowingly seeking out partners who mirror the very wounds you have yet to heal? But the implications go even deeper. If your unconscious is choosing these relationships, then who truly are you? Are you the conscious self, the one that longs for connection, stability, and mutual respect? Or are you also the hidden self, magnetized toward chaos, manipulation, and neglect, precisely because these are the dynamics etched into your earliest emotional blueprints? And if that is the case, can you ever trust your own desires? You might be wondering now, how does this happen? Why would anyone unconsciously seek out suffering? What primal forces are at play in these patterns of attraction and betrayal? The answer, as Jung would suggest, is buried deep within the architecture of your psyche, entwined with the collective inheritance of the human species and the personal scars of your unique history. But to grasp this fully, you must be willing to travel beyond the surface explanations of modern psychology, the simplistic mantras of self-love and boundaries, and descend into the shadowy depths where your true motivations lie hidden. The truth is both liberating and terrifying. You are not fully in control of whom you love. Not yet, but you can be. if you are willing to see what you have long refused to see. So, let us descend deeper into the underworld of the psyche, where the hidden problem resides, the silent architect of your relational fate. Are you ready to meet the force within you that keeps attracting what you most fear? You descend into the inner sanctum of your psyche, where light gives way to mist and shadows writhe in the recesses of forgotten memory. Here, beneath the polished veneer of your conscious identity, lives the hidden problem, a force more ancient and more cunning than you may have ever imagined. Carl Jung spent his life mapping this treacherous terrain. He realized that much of what we believe to be our personality is merely a mask persona carefully crafted to navigate the demands of society. Behind this mask is the shadow, the disowned, denied, and repressed aspects of the self. But this shadow is not inert. It is active. It longs to be seen, to be expressed. And if you refuse to acknowledge it, it will find expression without your consent, particularly in your relationships. This is where the roots of toxic attraction grow. You are not attracted to toxicity randomly. You are attracted to it because it resonates with something unspoken inside you, something that has not been fully integrated into your conscious sense of self. As Jung argued, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But when one or both personalities are unconsciously ruled by their shadow, the reaction is often volatile, even destructive. Consider this. Every unmet childhood need, every repressed emotion, every internalized belief about your unworthiness forms part of the unconscious script you now follow. And in a cruel irony, what feels familiar, no matter how damaging, is often what feels safe. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer spoke of this in his doctrine of compulsive repetition, asserting that human beings are driven not by rational will, but by blind, unconscious forces that seek to recreate familiar patterns, even at the expense of their own well-being. In other words, your psyche does not seek happiness. It seeks familiarity. If, for example, your early experiences taught you that love is conditional, unpredictable, or abusive, then your unconscious mind may equate these very qualities with intimacy itself. Thus, when you encounter someone who is emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or neglectful, you may feel inexplicably drawn to them, not because they offer what you need, but because they mirror what you already know. This is the hidden problem, the fusion of familiarity with desire. You mistake what is known for what is good. Jean-Paul Sartre once declared, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But what if you have made yourself out of the very wounds and defenses you had to adopt to survive? What if your choices are not truly free, but bound by the invisible chains of your past? Jung understood that freedom requires more than willpower. It demands self-knowledge. Without it, you are condemned to repeat your history, seeking in others the completion of parts of yourself you have never dared to own. There is also the cultural dimension to this trap. Modern society, with its relentless focus on the individual, often blinds us to the collective forces shaping our desires. As Aldous Huxley warned in Brave New World, the illusion of choice is a powerful tool of social control. You are encouraged to follow your heart, yet few recognize that their hearts have been conditioned from birth by family, culture, media, and historical forces they never chose. And so, you might wonder, if these toxic relationships are rooted in the unconscious, how do they first take shape? Jung would point to the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine archetypes that dwell within all of us. These archetypes, he explained, shape our attractions and expectations in romantic relationships. But when these archetypes are distorted by trauma or repression, they give rise to what Jung called the anima possession or animus possession, states in which a person is overtaken by unconscious projections. You may believe you are falling in love with a person, but in truth, you are falling in love with a projection of your inner wounds and unmet needs, cast upon their face like an ancient haunting film. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, once said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." But here is the tragedy. Most people never realize that it is not the situation, nor even the partners they choose, that must first be changed, but their own internal relationship to themselves. To love consciously, to attract relationships that nourish rather than deplete, you must first confront the inner architecture that keeps drawing you to what harms you. But this is no simple task. It requires the courage to face your shadow, to take radical responsibility for the ways you have been complicit in your own suffering, not out of guilt, but out of the recognition that only by integrating what has been repressed can you stop projecting it onto others. And yet, even now, you may feel resistance. A voice within you might be whispering, "But I deserve better. I didn't choose this." And you are right. You did not consciously choose it, but your unconscious did. Jung wrote extensively about this idea of the compulsion to repeat, how the psyche seeks wholeness through repetition, often dragging you back into the same relational dynamics, over and over, until you finally become aware of the lesson hidden within them. Not of who you think you are, but of the parts of you that remain unloved, unhealed, and unseen. The hidden problem, then, is not that you keep attracting toxic people, but that you keep fleeing from yourself, leaving your unconscious to choose in your absence. The question now is no longer why you keep attracting these relationships. We have traced their roots. The question is, what are the unseen consequences of living this way? What does it cost you, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, to remain trapped in this unconscious cycle? To answer that, we must go even deeper. Are you prepared to see what this hidden force is quietly stealing from your life right now, even as you listen? Now, imagine continuing this cycle for years, even decades. The same patterns, the same betrayals, the same quiet devastations, all hidden beneath the illusions of new beginnings. Each time you tell yourself, "This one is different," only to awaken, weeks or months later, to the same gnawing feeling of emptiness, confusion, and self-doubt. But what is being stolen from you is far greater than your time or your hope for love. Carl Jung would insist that what is at stake here is nothing less than your soul as individuation, your one precious chance to become who you were always meant to be. The unseen consequence of repeatedly attracting toxic relationships is that you become alienated not only from others, but from your true self. Every time you are drawn into these destructive dynamics, a little more of your inner authority is eroded. You begin to question your instincts, mistrust your desires, and suppress your natural emotional responses. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned about this descent into nihilism, the condition where lifeless meaning collapses under the weight of repeated disillusionment. When you find yourself in yet another manipulative relationship, you may begin to wonder, what's the point of trying? Why even hope? But here's the insidious twist. The more wounded you become by these relationships, the more vulnerable you are to repeating them. Psychologically, this is known as the trauma repetition cycle. Neurologically, your brain becomes conditioned to interpret chaos as normal, to mistake intermittent reinforcement, those moments of affection interspersed with manipulation, as love. Your nervous system, trained by previous experiences, begins to light up in the presence of the very behaviors that should signal danger. This is how the trap tightens. And society, largely unconscious of this deeper psychological architecture, reinforces the cycle through its romantic myths. Popular culture glorifies the tortured romance, the bad boy, the unattainable partner, as if suffering were a necessary component of passion. From Hollywood films to pop songs, the narrative is clear. Love must be a battlefield. Thus, you internalize the belief that relationships are supposed to hurt, to require endless sacrifice, to demand the erosion of self for the sake of connection. But Jung would see this as a profound misunderstanding a tragic inversion of the purpose of relationship itself. For Jung, relationships are meant to be crucibles for growth and individuation, not sites of endless wounding. When relationships instead become arenas for self-betrayal and repression, your psyche suffers a gradual fragmentation. You begin to compartmentalize, presenting a version of yourself that appeases, placates, or endures while burying your authentic needs and desires even deeper. And this fragmentation manifests in your emotional life. You may notice a creeping emotional numbness, the inability to feel joy or even pain with the same intensity you once did. You may develop an anxious hypervigilance, always scanning your partner for signs of impending rejection, or a cold detachment, convincing yourself that you don't really care. But beneath these protective adaptations is a profound loneliness. The loneliness of being estranged, not just from others, but from the core of who you are. Jean-Paul Sartre described this state as mauvaise foi, bad faith, the condition of living in self-deception, of denying your freedom and responsibility to live authentically. In this case, bad faith manifests as the refusal to confront your role in perpetuating these relational patterns. Yet, this refusal is not merely intellectual, it is existential. To admit that you have unconsciously attracted toxicity is to confront the unbearable truth that your suffering has, in some sense, been self-authored. But it is precisely this confrontation that Jung believed was essential for healing and transformation. Until then, the consequences continue to accumulate. Beyond the psychological and emotional toll, there are physiological consequences as well. Chronic stress from toxic relationships can dysregulate your immune system, increase cortisol levels, and impair cognitive function. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote, and relational wounds leave their imprints not only on your heart, but in your very cells. Spiritually, the consequences are even more devastating. Repeatedly choosing or being chosen by toxic relationships fosters a spiritual nihilism, a quiet surrender to the idea that meaningful connection is impossible, that intimacy is inherently dangerous, that love is always a prelude to pain. You may retreat into isolation, or worse, into a cynical detachment from life itself, convinced that your worth is defined by how others treat you. But perhaps the most tragic consequence is this: every time you re-enter these cycles, you postpone the encounter with your own wholeness. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human life was the process of individuation, the integration of all aspects of the self, both light and shadow, into a cohesive and authentic whole. Toxic relationships, by their very nature, impede this process by keeping you fixated on external validation and survival rather than internal integration and growth. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" you find yourself endlessly asking, "Why won't they love me?" This is the cost, the forfeiture of your own becoming. And yet, despite all this, the cycle persists. Why? Because the unconscious mind is not easily dissuaded by reason or willpower. It operates through symbols, patterns, and projections, relentlessly seeking to resolve what remains unresolved. Until you recognize these patterns, they will continue to define your relational life, often in increasingly destructive ways. But here, as we stand at the edge of this grim revelation, a new question arises. Is it possible to break free? Is there a way to disarm this unconscious compulsion, to reclaim your agency, to choose partners in a life that truly nurture your authentic self? Carl Jung believed there was. But the path to freedom is not through avoidance or suppression. It is through radical, often painful confrontation with the very forces within you that have kept you trapped. Are you prepared to rebel against the deepest scripts of your psyche? To challenge everything you thought you knew about love, attraction, and even yourself? If so, then let us take the next step, to explore the rebellion, the way to break free from the unconscious chains of toxic love, and reclaim the authorship of your life. Imagine standing at the precipice of your own story, staring down at the well-worn path that has led you here, one strewn with the remnants of broken trust abandoned, dreams and the echoing ache of connections that once felt like salvation but revealed themselves as cages. Now, for the first time, you realize you don't have to keep walking this path. But breaking free is not as simple as walking away from the wrong person. It is about walking away from the wrong version of yourself, the version constructed from survival, compromise, and unconscious repetition. Carl Jung taught that real freedom does not come from denying your shadow, nor from suppressing your wounds, but from integrating them into your conscious self. This is the rebellion, to turn toward what you've been taught to turn away from, to make peace with the parts of you that you have for so long believed were unlovable, dangerous, or shameful. It begins with radical self-honesty. No more hiding behind stories of victimhood. No more reciting the script that you are just unlucky in love. Instead, you confront the painful possibility that you have been complicit in your suffering, not out of malice or stupidity, but out of an ancient drive toward unconscious repetition. And here lies the first counterintuitive truth. Healing begins with responsibility, not blame. Responsibility means you recognize that although you did not choose your wounds, you can now choose to face them. You can choose to interrupt the cycle. But how? The first act of rebellion is to cultivate what Jung called shadow awareness, to begin observing your own unconscious projections. When you find yourself inexplicably drawn to someone, pause. Ask, what part of me does this person represent? Is it a longing for validation? A reenactment of abandonment? A desire to feel needed, even at the cost of your own dignity? This is not about demonizing others, but about demystifying the forces that compel you toward them. As you do this, you start to withdraw your projections. You begin to see the other not as the solution to your pain, but as a mirror reflecting what you must yet heal within yourself. And here, another paradox emerges. The more you integrate your shadow, the less power it holds over you. As Jung noted, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The second act of rebellion is to redefine your concept of love. For so long, you may have mistaken intensity for intimacy, chaos for passion, or emotional unavailability for mystery. But these were never love. They were echoes of unresolved trauma. To break free, you must reorient your understanding of what it means to be in relationship. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Similarly, you must develop a why for love that transcends your unconscious compulsions. What if love is not about completing you, but about accompanying you on your path toward wholeness? What if the purpose of relationship is not to rescue you from loneliness, but to support your individuation? This shift in perspective changes everything. Suddenly, you are no longer seeking partners who fit the mold of your past wounds, but those who challenge and support your evolution. You begin to desire not what is familiar, but what is healthy relationships rooted in mutual respect, emotional availability, and shared values. But this shift requires the third act of rebellion, the cultivation of solitude. The modern world, obsessed with connectivity and instant gratification, often pathologizes solitude. But Jung understood its necessity. He wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. In solitude, you learn to communicate with yourself. You learn to listen to the subtle cues of your psyche, the quiet desires, the hidden fears, the nascent dreams that have long been overshadowed by your pursuit of another's approval. This is not the solitude of isolation, but of integration. You begin to see that you are already whole, already enough, and that love is not something to be earned through suffering, but something to be shared freely with those who can meet you where you are. And here, perhaps for the first time, you encounter genuine self-compassion, not the self-indulgent kind that excuses poor choices, but the fierce compassion that holds you accountable while offering you grace. You forgive yourself for the years spent in unconscious repetition, for the pain endured, for the lessons learned too late, because you now understand there is no other way. The philosopher Viktor Frankl argued that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. Your past, your wounds, your patterns, they all brought you here, to this very threshold of transformation. The final act of rebellion is to step through that threshold. It is to risk the discomfort of breaking the cycle, to endure the loneliness that may come when you refuse to engage with toxicity, and to trust that in doing so, you are making space for something new. You are making space for relationships that honor your worth, for a life no longer dictated by unconscious compulsion, but guided by conscious intention. This is the ultimate rebellion, to live as a fully integrated being, no longer at war with yourself, no longer outsourcing your healing to others, but standing rooted in your own wholeness. But even as you taste this newfound freedom, one question lingers. What is the ultimate truth that lies beyond this rebellion? What profound realization awaits when you stop seeking love as a salve for your wounds and begin to see it as a celebration of your wholeness? To answer this, we must take one final step toward the ultimate revelation that redefines everything. Are you ready? Imagine this. You are no longer reaching out for love with trembling hands. You are no longer scanning every face for redemption. You are no longer writing poems for people who cannot read the language of your soul. Instead, you are still, present, rooted in yourself. The longing is gone, not because you've given up on love, but because you found something deeper than being desired. You have found yourself. This is the ultimate truth Carl Jung spent his life circling. You are not broken. You are incomplete. And every toxic relationship you've ever endured was not proof of your inadequacy, but a summons to wholeness. It was your unconscious, screaming through the chaos, begging you to see what had been buried, disowned, and ignored. Because the truth is this, we do not attract what we deserve. We attract what we are, or more precisely, what we are not yet willing to acknowledge in ourselves. Jung's philosophy of individuation tells us that the self is not a finished product, it is a process, a becoming. And the most profound relationships are not those that make us feel whole, but those that reveal the fragments we have yet to reclaim. This is the final, most disquieting paradox. The people who broke you were also your teachers, not because their cruelty was justified, not because you should be grateful for your suffering, but because your unconscious chose them again and again not to punish you, but to push you, to force your gaze inward, to tear down the illusion that someone outside of you could ever complete what is unfinished within. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But few ever claim this privilege because it requires descending into the depths of their own psyche, standing in the fire of self-reckoning and emerging, not as someone fixed, but as someone fused, every shattered piece melted together into something unbreakable. You don't heal from toxic relationships by finding the right partner. You heal by becoming the person who no longer resonates with toxicity. You heal by no longer needing intensity to feel alive, no longer mistaking neglect for mystery, no longer craving chaos as a stand-in for connection. You realize that love, real love, is not a lightning bolt. It's not a rescue. It's not a rush of adrenaline masquerading as intimacy. Real love is calm, grounded, mutual. It does not dazzle you with potential. It meets you in presence. But to reach this kind of love, you must pass through the underworld of your own psyche. You must mourn the illusions you once called love. You must bury the fantasy that someone else will save you from yourself. And then, in the stillness that follows, something sacred happens. You begin to feel a profound reverence for your own existence. You begin to see that you were never meant to be half of a whole, but a whole encountering another whole in shared wonder. The ultimate truth is this: you are not here to be chosen. You are here to choose. To choose yourself, not as an act of selfishness, but as a declaration of sovereignty. To choose partners who reflect your healing, not your wounds. To choose a life of depth, meaning, and authenticity, rather than the shallow thrill of familiar suffering. And as you live this truth, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop attracting people who want to consume you. You start attracting people who want to meet you. People who don't flinch when you speak your truth. People who don't retreat when you show your darkness. People who see your wholeness, not as a threat, but as an invitation. This is the love Jung pointed toward, not romantic fantasy, but psychospiritual union. A relationship between two individuals who have done the inner work, who have met their own shadows, and who no longer demand that the other carry what they refuse to face. And so, perhaps for the first time, you understand. All those years you spent trying to fix others, trying to be enough for people who could not love you. The truth was never that you were too much or not enough. The truth was that you were always being called inward, back to yourself, back to the forgotten cathedral within. And in that cathedral, you now stand, not as a supplicant, not as a beggar, but as a sovereign soul who has walked through fire, held your own gaze in the dark, and emerged with something no one can take from you: integration. You are no longer fragmented. You are no longer driven by unconscious repetition. You are no longer asleep to your own patterns. You are awake, fully, radiantly awake. And with this awakening comes peace, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of embodiment. You now know who you are. And more importantly, you know who you are not. You are not someone who confuses abuse for affection. You are not someone who sacrifices truth for connection. You are not someone who begs to be loved. You are someone who carries love within you. And from this place of fullness, everything changes. You speak differently. You choose differently. You love differently. Because now you are no longer seeking a savior. You are walking alongside another soul interdependent, not dependent. Whole, not hollow. Awake, not asleep. This is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of relationships built on truth, not projection. The beginning of a life no longer haunted by the ghosts of what once wounded you. This is the power of becoming conscious. This is the liberation that Jung promised, not comfort, not ease, but truth. And in truth, the deepest kind of freedom. So ask yourself, now standing on this threshold, heart wide open, will you walk back into the familiar, or will you step forward into your wholeness? The choice, at last, is yours, and it always has been. If this resonated with you and sparked new insights, make sure to subscribe for more content that dives deep into the hidden layers of the mind, and like this video to help it reach others who might need this message. Your support helps keep these transformative ideas alive and spreading. Thank you for being part of this journey.